Everybody see that?
Yes, we can see it, Carrie.
Super. Well, hi, everybody. I know I'm seeing little faces on the screen, but it's nice to be with you this morning. Just a little bit more, and thank you, Helen, for the introduction, a little bit more about Millard Consulting. Our mission is to build the capacity of nonprofit organizations and the individuals who serve them. So doing webinars like today, from our perspective, really helps build the capacity of the field. And so why do we care about capacity building? It's because our vision is that thriving communities and families are happening, right? That communities and families are doing well because nonprofits are highly effective. So that's my ultimate goal for you today, is for me to be able to share some information, for us to have a dialogue, so at the end of the day that your nonprofit is effective, because when that happens, we know communities and families thrive. So our objectives today, we have three. One is for you to understand the strategic importance of donor engagement, and particularly with this audience being mainly a financial audience. Donor engagement is just not something that the fundraising team or your advancement or development staff should be worrying about. This really is an indication of the health of your relationship with your donors, and that has an absolutely very clear bottom line impact. The second one is some new skills in analyzing and forecasting fundraising goals. We have some spreadsheets that we will share, and you'll get copies of these after the fact. And the third is the latest research. So there's really interesting data out there that will help inform our best practices and conversation for the day. So a little bit about you. So we are in a breakout room. So the Zoom poll feature is not working in the breakout room. So I'm going to ask that you put these in the chat. So number one, how would you rate the health of your organization's donor relationships? Is it A, very healthy, B, healthy, C, neutral, D, unhealthy, or E, very unhealthy? If you can put those in the chat, then I can see those. So far someone said C. Any other answers? Another C. So neutral. So far, and we just had a B, which is a healthy relationship. So that's good. Those who are saying, C, neutral, or D, unhealthy, or very unhealthy, we really want you to learn from this today. Those who are saying B, healthy, and A, very healthy, that's great. And I hope for you too, you're still learning some new tips and tricks in today's conversation. So one more poll question for you. And again, we'll set this up as letters that you can put in the chat. How would you rate the level of board engagement and fundraising in your organization? So A, excellent, B, good, C, neutral, D, bad, or E, terrible. So this is about board engagement and fundraising. Oh, so we got a couple D's automatically, which is not surprising. A lot of organizations give their board a negative grade. We got a B, which is good, so that's wonderful. Any other answers? We will, at the end of toward the end of our slide deck, have information about national data and the board's role in fundraising, but we'll talk about a way to maybe reframe that, especially for those who said D, bad engagement. And then if you have a specific question as we are going through the presentation, please put that in the chat. Catherine Martin on my team is going to help me monitor the chat. And so don't hesitate to add that to the conversation. So let's do some basics on donor engagement. There are three primary fundraising strategies. And these cut across all size organizations, whether your nonprofit is small or you are a large institution. There's three primary strategies. And the first one is ask, right? And you may have heard this adage, before that, the donors don't give unless they're asked, right? You have to ask for the money. So ask is the solicitation. That is the formal face-to-face ask. It's the direct mail letter that goes out. It's a grant application. It's a proposal. It's an email campaign. That is the act of solicitation. Number 2 is thank. And that may be surprising to you. You might be saying, how is thanking a donor a key fundraising strategy? We'll tell you more about that in a little bit. But when you think about thanking donors, there's 2 aspects of that. One is acknowledgement, the tax letter acknowledgement that the IRS requires that we do for gifts of a certain size, and also recognition. Do you have a donor wall? Is this a capital campaign and the donor wants to name a room? Or is it simply just publishing their name in your annual report? So when you think about thanking donors, it's acknowledgement and recognition. And the 3rd is engage. And that is our focus today, is donor engagement. Engage has 2 aspects, cultivation and stewardship. So we'll do a little bit deeper dive in all of these. So ask, again, this is the solicitation. And our note to you is, please do not rely on passive asks. And don't wait till the end of the year. It's September. You should be working on your year-end letter campaign right now. If you don't send your year-end appeal out until Thanksgiving or the first week of December, you're waiting far too long. And what do I mean by don't rely on passive asks? Passive asks are the, please consider a gift in any amount to the organization. That is not a direct ask of, please give a gift of $100 to our organization. And so thank, the reason why I said this is such an important part of fundraising strategy, it is most often cited as the reason donors gave again or gave more. It must be meaningful, and it should not include another ask. I am always surprised when I get a thank you letter from an organization, and in the thank you letter is another appeal to give again. So please don't do that. A thank you should be meaningful, it should be timely, it should be accurate, and it should be purely the appreciation and, of course, tax acknowledgement stuff that's needed, but it should be a genuine and sincere appreciation for the gift. And then again, as I mentioned on engage, it is about 2 aspects, cultivation and stewardship. So you have to build relationships and share the impact of their gift before you ask again. Cultivation is before an ask, and stewardship is after a donor gives. So this is an important question. What if we told you that 74% of your donors would give indefinitely? Right? What would you say? What would that mean for your cash flow, for your budgeting, for your planning, if 74% of your donors gave indefinitely? Many of you would say that's impossible, or you might say that would be a game changer. Think about that for a moment. And I'm going to tell you that this is possible to get to this goal statement, and think, start your wheels spinning about what would this mean for the programs and services that your nonprofit offers. So a few more fundamentals. So Penelope Burke, and some of you on the webinar might have heard of that name before. She's a social science researcher and author. Her field of study is donor behavior. She has a book called Donor-Centered Fundraising, which is the best, right? It's really considered an industry standard. If your organization doesn't have this book, if you haven't read it before, I highly recommend that you buy it. She also publishes an annual donor survey, which is her findings and her data from her donor behavior research. She is considered an authoritative member of the industry, and I'm going to give you some statistics and data from her. Again, the next few slides are Penelope Burke's data, and we have that source cited. So remember how I said thank is a primary fundraising strategy, and you might be wondering, why? Why isn't the fundraising strategies all about the solicitation? So this is from Burke's data. 95% of respondents would be very appreciative if a member of the board called them within a day or two of receiving their gift just to say thank you. So if your organization is not utilizing board members to make thank you phone calls, which are the easiest phone calls to make, the most wonderful phone calls to make, then I'm going to challenge you to start doing that tomorrow, right? Have board members call. The majority of time you get voicemail. And if you get someone on the phone, it's a very short conversation to say, my name is Carrie. I sit on the board of ABC organization, and I just called to say thank you for your gift. You never know what conversations will develop from that type of a phone call. I've experienced it myself with an organization that I worked with years ago. I did a thank you phone call like this, and it was the start of a relationship. And that family, that husband and wife, that couple, they ended up becoming not only major donors to the organization, but he ended up becoming board chair of the organization over time. So please consider using your board in that way. The second bullet is that 85% would definitely or probably support the charity again if this happened. If your organization struggles with donor retention, this is the number one way to get donors to give again and to get them to give more. And the third bullet on here is 86 would definitely or probably give a larger gift. So you're going to increase your donor retention, meaning donors are going to give again. You're going to increase your average gift size because they're going to give more. And you're going to deepen that relationship that you have with your donors simply because of how they were thanked. And I will tell you, with all the nonprofits that we work with, so much time, effort, and energy is spent on the solicitation strategy. How are we going to ask? Who are we going to ask? How much are we going to ask for? And about this much time is spent on how are we going to thank donors? Who's going to help us thank donors? What's the most authentic way? What's the most timely way? Do we have the back of house infrastructure to make sure that the letters go out in a quick manner and that the names are spelled right and they're accurate? So again, I really want you to think about this strategic importance of building a relationships with your donors and how thanking them is a key aspect of that. Some more Penelope Burke data on engaging donors. So 94% of donors never or rarely get a call from a charity unless it's a solicitation. So think about that for a moment. 94% only hear from the organization when it's time to ask for money again. 98% of donors are never visited by a charity unless it's a solicitation call. 98%. 55% never or rarely receive measurable results on their gifts at work. 29% sometimes receive measurable results. So for those first two bullet points, are you calling, are you visiting your donors purely to just engage with them? Ask them how they're doing. To do a stewardship conversation. Let them know the impact of their gift. Their gift was, helped you expand a program. Have you gone back to those donors and said, because of your generosity, we were able to expand this program. And now this is the change that we see. This many more people have been impacted as a result. This number of children are now reading at a higher grade level or whatever the activity is. So sharing back to donors the measurable results, the outcomes of your work because of their support is deeply meaningful to donors. So calling them, visiting them, sending them a stewardship letter that says, we just want to tell you about how wonderful your gift has been to our organization. And as a result, this is the impact that we're having. And nowhere in that conversation, in the call, in the meeting, or in the letter, can there be any mention of another ask, even if it's passive. If there's any tone of we hope you give again, then that becomes a solicitation. It's no longer a donor engagement strategy. So when you go back to your organization and you do an audit, which means, not a financial audit like our friends HW&Co do, but a development audit, print out every solicitation, every e-blast that had a request, every newsletter that had a giving envelope in it, put it out on the table and look at all the messages and say, how many of these messages have been solicitation messages? How many of these messages have been donor engagement messages, which were purely cultivation or stewardship, purely about the third bullet on here, sharing the results of their gift with no mention of another ask. And I promise you, you will be surprised. So again, all this time, effort, and energy spent on how are we going to solicit? But is your organization spending time on how do we do a meaningful, timely, and accurate thank you? And are we spending time, effort, and energy on how we simply just engage with our donors in a conversation? Not always organization directed either. That conversation should be a two-way street. Asking the donors, how are you? What are you seeing in the community? What questions do you have of us? How's your son doing now that he's off at college? Or whatever it is. If it is only a one-way conversation, let me tell you the 5 things that our organization is doing and why we're doing them so well. That's not engagement. That's not a dialogue. That's a monologue. So also be careful in your engagement communications, what those messages are, to make sure that they are not a one-way organization-centered approach or focus, that they are two-way, that they're conversational, and that they're donor-centered. So a little bit more from Penelope Burke's data. She then said to the donors that she was researching, if, a big if, donor communications improved, what would then happen? 93% would definitely or probably give again to a charity that provided a prompt and personal thank you, followed up later with a meaningful report on their gift. 93%. If the thank you was prompt, accurate, and meaningful, and if they heard about the impact of their gift. 64% would definitely or probably give more. And then the third one is what I posed to you on the slide earlier. 74% would definitely or probably continue to give indefinitely, as long as they continued to get these things. So that's why donor engagement is strategic. That's why donor engagement should be something that everyone in the organization is cognizant of. It shouldn't just rest on the shoulders of the development director. Folks in finance, folks in program, folks in marketing should all understand the context for why this is so critical for your organization. At the beginning of the session earlier today, Helen talked about risk, right? All of this will mitigate risk if you can improve this level of data with your donors, because you will be raising more money. It will be more consistent money over time. So let's talk about the money aspect of it and the forecasting and the budgeting aspect of it. Well, and I'll pause there for a second. Are there any questions in the chat? I'll just look real quick. Please let me know if I'm going too fast or if you want me to go back to anything. So let's talk about some budgeting tools. So the first, this is our third poll. And so you can put these answers in the chat. What is your organization's donor retention rate? And donor retention rate means X number of donors gave in 2020, and what percentage of those donors have given again in 2021. So year over year retention. Is your donor retention rate 80% or more, 70 to 79%, 60 to 69%, 50 to 59, 40 to 49, 30 to 39, less than 30, or simply letter H, I don't know. So if you can put in the chat, I'll give you a few seconds here. A, B, C, D, E, F, G, or H. So it looks like we have a C, a B, and an H. so far. If you have B, A, or B, 70% or higher, you have solid donor retention. You're doing good. If you have C or D, it's not unusual. We'll talk about some national data and what those are. If it is E or F, those are serious problems. E, F, or G, I should say. Those are serious problems. And if it's H, if it's you don't know, this is a number that everybody in the organization should know. I will tell you, we did this work with a client one time that they were H, they didn't know what their donor retention rate was. We did the calculations and it turned out that they had a 26% donor retention rate. So just think about that for a moment, 26% donor retention rate. That meant every year they were losing 74% of their donors. Think about that, even just from a for-profit customer standpoint. If the local pizza shop on your corner lost 74% of their customers every year, that pizza shop would go out of business probably. If you have a very low donor retention rate, it is an indication of the health of the relationship with your donors. It is an indication that something is really wrong. And there's a couple reasons for that. If your organization relies mainly on events for fundraising, you will typically have a lower donor retention rate because that is, well, my company didn't buy a table this year, so I'm not going. So there could be some reasons why you have a lower donor retention rate if you are primarily fundraising through galas and table sales. If that isn't the case, then you really have to go back and analyze, what are we doing wrong? Are you doing the things that in the Penelope Burke data says you need to do? Or are you treating your donors like an ATM? You're just constantly cranking out ask messages, right? We need more money. We need more money. Give again, give again, give again. If your donors feel like all the messages coming at them are purely transactional, they will feel like an ATM. All you want is their money. And they're gonna break that tie with you because they don't feel like there's a relationship. They don't feel like your organization is really interested in them as a person, and that you really aren't interested in their investment in the programs and services that you offer. So this poll question is really important. I want you to go back to your organization, analyze your donor retention rate, and see where you land on here. So, why is it so important to know about donor retention rate and average gift size? Again, if you don't have this data, it is the first thing that you must address. Earlier, Tony Lanassa talked about you have to have a tip line for your organization in terms of cybersecurity. And I will tell you, you have to know what your donor retention rate and average gift size is. Otherwise, all of the work and effort that you're doing in your organization for fundraising is just spinning wheels. You are just working, in circles, and you aren't gaining traction because you don't know what the baseline is. And so let's dive into that a little bit more. So, why is donor retention rate so important? So especially for my financial friends on the call, the folks who are in the finance office of your organization, the question is, how much can the organization raise? So here's an example. If you raised $40,000 in year one, and you want to raise $50,000 in year two, it's not a growth of $10,000 in new money. Rather, it's a growth of $10,000 plus the amount lost in donor attrition, right? So we hear this all the time from financial folks with the clients that we serve. They will say, hey, fundraising team, hey, development office, you guys raised $40,000 last year. We're going to give you a $10,000 increase. You got to hit $50,000 this year. And this is why this is so problematic. If you have a 90% donor retention rate, you would then need to raise $14,000 in new money, the $10,000 plus the $4,000 to make up for the folks that you lose. But if you have a 60% donor retention rate, you need to raise $26,000. which is a significant difference and will impact success. And this is the rub that we will see between finance and development, very often. Finance will say, well, we just told them they had to raise 10,000 more, how hard is that? Well, if it's a 60% donor retention rate, or God forbid, it's a 26% donor retention rate, they're actually having to come up with 26,000 or more to hit that increased goal from 40 to 50. So if you say, okay, I got that, I understand it, we have to understand donor retention rate. So, okay, it's 60%, we have to raise $26,000 more to hit the new goal. Okay, how many donors do I have to talk to in order to do that? Well, the number of donors needed depends on now the average gift size. If the average gift for your organization with a 60% retention rate is $500, that means you need 52 new donors to give $500. And that's a gut check conversation that finance, development, your CEO can all say, okay, can we find 52 people to give us $500? You might say, yes, we can do that. Okay, then the goal is set. But if your average gift is $75, that means you need to find 347 new donors to give you $75 in order to hit the goal. That may be a very different gut check conversation. You might say, there's no way we're going to find 347 new people to give us $75. Or you might say, yeah, we can do that. We have a strategy for that level of donor acquisition. So again, that's why these two data points are so important. And again, we're talking about donor engagement. How are you going to increase donor retention? How are you going to increase your average gift size? As a reminder, the Penelope Burke data tells you how. By building those relationships with donors, by having authentic thank you, strategies in place, and using your board in this process. So a couple of rules of thumb. So first of all, in terms of average gift and retention rates, those are typically less than your current or renewed donors. So if you have a donor who's been giving to you 3-4 years, their retention rate will be higher, their average gift will be higher than the donor that you got this year, your brand new donor. The odds of a brand new one-time donor giving again are much less than a donor who's been giving to you over time. And the first gift is typically less than the donor that's been giving to you over time. So when you're analyzing this for your organization, if you have a low donor retention rate and you have high acquisition rates, meaning you're getting a lot of new donors in every year and you're churning and burning, you might want to do some different level analysis compared to your current donors versus and renewing donors versus new donors. And then the second rule of thumb that I have on here is a personal belief that the frustration and chronic turnover that we see with development professionals, the national average is that a development director lasts 15 to 18 months in his or her job. I believe goes back to this frustration. Finance told them they needed to raise 50,000 instead of 40,000, but no one did the analysis to understand what that truly meant. If it was an attainable goal or an artificial goal, a Herculean task, they did their best, they didn't hit the goal, and they leave out of frustration, or they get fired because they didn't hit their goal. So I mentioned some of the national data. So AFP is the Association of Fundraising Professionals. They do something called the Fundraising Effectiveness Project. They have loads of calculators, tools, fact sheets, educational material. So highly recommend visiting the Fundraising Effectiveness Project website. This is a screenshot about some donor retention. And you can see repeat donor retention, which is what I mentioned, those donors who've been giving to you over time, nationally is 59.6%, so roughly 60%. And this is based on 2020 data. And that was a decrease of 3.9% over the prior year, 2019 data. So roughly 60% nationally, current donors renewing. And remember I said, new donors will have a lower likelihood of giving again than renewing donors. And this national data bears it out. The new donor retention rate nationally is 19.3%. It dropped significantly over 2019, down 9.2%. So just pause on this for a minute. Think about this for your organization. Can you imagine if your new donor retention rate was 40% instead of 19%? If your repeat donor retention rate was 80% instead of 60%, how much more money would that be generating for your organization? How much more goodwill would that be for your organization with that many more donors talking positively about your organization in the community? The third column on there is the recapture rate. That means a donor had given to you a couple years ago, they stopped giving to you, but you brought them back. We call those lapsed donors. So recapturing a relationship of a former donor who had stopped giving, but now give to you again. And that nationally is 4.3%. So what if you had 10% recapture rate instead of 4.3%? So there are 3 spreadsheets that you will get. I'll make sure Helen and the HW&Co team sends this out to everybody. There are 3. One is a goal calculation spreadsheet based on what we've just talked about, donor retention and average gift. The second is about probabilities for foundation and corporate gifts. And the third is because we are still all operating in pandemic world, right? COVID has not gone away. How do you assess the likelihood of a gift given the risk of the changing giving patterns? So I am going to switch my screen. So let me know if you can see the spreadsheet. Helen, can you let me know if this is visible?
Yeah, well, we can see it.
Great, thank you. So this is the spreadsheet calculation for, again, our fictitious goal of 50,000. These first 3 columns, we vary the retention rate. The second 3 columns, we vary the average gift size. And you can see if there were 300 donors who gave last fiscal year, your donor retention rate is 70%. That means 210 donors will give again based on that. If their average gift last year is $125, that means you're going to raise $26,250 based on renewals. Subtract that from the goal of 50, you have $23,750 left to be raised. Remember, the average gift of new donors is typically less than renewing donors. So if the average gift of new donors is $75, that means you need to find 317 people to give you $75. So that's the calculation for 70%. If your donor retention rate was 90%, you would only need to raise another 16,000. If your donor retention rate is 50%, that means you need to raise another 31,000. So this is a model set up for you. All the calculations are embedded so you can start plugging in your organization's data and then run various scenarios. And then you can have that conversation internally like, okay, if we can go from 79 to 90%, this is what it's going to mean. Then these 3 columns stick with a standard 80% donor retention rate, but it varies the average gift size, right? If our average gift size is $100, we're going to need to find, that means the gap in our goal is 26,000. But if our average gift size is $300, we've just overshot our goal on renewals. And you might say, well, that's not a problem. That's no problem. Well, it is, because it means then the goal wasn't high enough and we weren't budgeting well. This is the scenario that's really the best for any development director. A donor retention rate here of 80% with an average gift of $200 means that they're already going to raise $48,000 in renewals. They only need to find $2,000 of new money to hit that goal. So again, this will be shared with you to use for your organization. The second spreadsheet is what we call our probability spreadsheet for planning, prospecting foundations and corporations. And so PY is prior year. So, here's, fictitious names of foundations and corporations. So you document what was the prior year actual, how much money did they give us? CY is current year. What's the ask, the current year ask that we want to make? What is the probability of getting that gift? And the probability really goes back to donor engagement and relationship. What is our relationship with these foundations and corporations? Do we have a board member from, the Jones Foundation who sits on our board? And you calculate the probability, and then the amount that you budget is based on the probability. It is not based on the ask amount. So when we think about organizational risk, when it comes to fundraising and how we budget for fundraising, I can't overemphasize this enough. We see far too often organizations that budget based on what they believe they're going to ask, rather than budget on what they believe they're going to receive. And you will significantly minimize financial risk if you take this more cautious, conservative approach. Sit down with a small team, calculate what you believe the probability is, and then budget for that. It doesn't mean that you don't have the goals of asking for more, but you just take this more measured approach, taking into account what is our relationship with this organization? Are we engaged with them? Do they know who we are? Have we met with them? Have we had a cultivation meeting that wasn't an ask? And how did it go? And the third one, because of pandemic operations and with our clients, this is one that we worked on, and it's about the likelihood of the gift. And because there was a time last year in 2020 where this probability calculation went out the window, right? The world turned upside down. And so we had clients who said, I have no idea what the probability is because everything is changing. So then we developed this. Is this gift secured? They just told us yesterday, yes, they're going to give. Are you confident in the gift coming in? Is it neutral? You just don't have enough information given all that's happening in the world, or is there risk? Is there now a higher level of risk that this corporation's no longer going to give to your organization because now they're shifting all of their money to basic human needs and you're an arts organization? So then you can analyze corporations, foundations, other major donors in this example of, okay, is the gift secured? Are we confident in it? Are neutral? We just have no idea. Or, you know what, there's real risk with this organization. So I hope those are helpful to you as you go back with your organization and continue to have these conversations. So, what are some of the lessons learned in this regard? We are losing far too many of our donors, which means we are spinning our wheels and constantly trying to bring new donors into the fold. So again, posing some questions back to you. How does this data compare with your organization? And then this next one will be our last phase of the presentation, is about the board. How involved is your board in building donor relationships and deepening donor engagement? And you will notice that I didn't say in that second question, how involved is your board in solicitation? So remember, there's ask, thank, and engage. I will tell you, most board members do not want to be part of solicitation. National data tells us they don't want to have to ask. They don't want to ask their friends for money. There's a million reasons why they don't want to do that. So what if the way you engage your board is not on ask, solicitation, but rather on thank and engagement? And let's talk a little bit more about some of that national data. So there's a report called Leading with Intent. The most recent edition just came out this spring. It is published by BoardSource. BoardSource is the national and international thought leader in nonprofit board governance. Leading with Intent is a biennial study, and they research board chairs and chief executives. And I encourage all of you to read it. It is fascinating data and information about your organizations. This little excerpt from the report that you see on the screen is, what is the board's impact in defining strategic priorities? And you can see the difference between what the chief executive believes, how their board is doing with strategic priorities versus what the board chair believes. So, fascinating to see the difference between those perceptions. But, chief executives believe, only about a third of their boards are very positive in defining these strategic priorities. So some key findings with leading it with intent, there are 4. 1, boards are disconnected from the communities and peoples that they serve. Number 2, I'll come back to that in a second. Number 3, boards and executives to reflect on what those board expectations should be and how time is spent. Number 4, the role of the board chair. That board chair's leadership is critical. So let's go back to number 2, because that's highlighted here, because that's really our focus. Boards that prioritize fundraising above all else when it comes to the board's role do so at the expense of strategy, relevance, and impact. So again, if the messages to your board are help us raise money, we need money, call your friends. If there's an overemphasis on that, you are going to put the organization at greater risk, because the data will show strategy, relevance, and impact, other factors that are important for the board to consider, are going to decrease. And it's going to be a transactional message. You might get some one-time gifts. It's going to put the board in a position that they're not comfortable being in when there are other ways to engage them. So this, again, is also data from Leading with Intent. And it has been true in every study that Board Source has done for more than 2 decades, that fundraising is the lowest scoring activity of board performance over time. So this, again, is showing the chief executive versus the board chair and their perceptions. How important is fundraising in terms of your expectations for the board? Chief executive says very important, 70%, board chair says 61%. How would you grade the board's performance in fundraising? Look at this data. Excellent, 4% from the chief executive, 8% from the board. Below average or failing, 48% or 50%. So I say to you, the whole theme is strategic donor engagement. The way we've been doing this, the way we've been asking boards to participate in fundraising is not working. Thanking and engaging donors is not only as critical as the solicitation, but the data from Penelope Burke shows it is critical. So if you reframe this entire conversation for how is your board engaged in fundraising, to, instead of that, how is your board engaged in donor engagement? How is your board used to thank donors, to cultivate donors, to steward them after a gift is made? You will see board engagement go through the roof. You will see donor engagement go through the roof. And at the end of the day, you will be raising more money. And it will be more consistent money over time, because you're going to level out and increase donor retention, and you're going to level out and increase average gift. Then this last one from Leading with Intent is, when again, this overemphasis, when there is a very high importance placed on solicitation, on fundraising, how all these other areas of board performance reduce. And this shows the data from when a board says, no, it's not important at all, how high these scores are on other areas versus the fundraising score. So I do want to leave some time for Q&A. And if there's any questions in the chat, and you will get the slide deck. There are links to Penelope Burke, links to the Fundraising Effectiveness Project, links to Board Source and Leading with Intent, so that you can go back to your organization, continue to have these conversations, and dive into the data. Are there any questions for me? If anyone wants to go off mute or pose in the chat, and I'm happy to take those for the next few minutes. And happy to go back and elaborate on it.
There are a couple questions. And I'll just, the first one is, are there standard donation levels guidelines on this, like i.e. up to 250 or 250 to 2,500 or 2,500 to 5,000?
So that depends on your organization. So it's a good question. So if I go back 1 second, the person who's asked that question, the first question you should ask is, how does our organization define a major gift? So a major gift to one organization could be any gift of $1,000 or more. A major gift to another organization could be any gift of $100,000 or more. So the first thing you have to ask is, how does our organization define major gift? So once you've answered that, then you can go back and do those giving levels. If a major gift is $1,000, then maybe you have a giving level at 50, at 100, at 250, at 5, you would have more incremental levels because a major gift is 1,000. If your major gift is 50 or 100,000, then you might start at 500, right? So you do that. You think about those giving levels based on what it means for your organization and how incremental it needs to be. Go ahead, Helen.
And then I think there was a little bit of a follow-up, and I don't know, this might be out of your wheelhouse. They asked about for 990 reporting.
So what's the question for 990 reporting?
The same person that posed the like the gift guidelines also just asked like for 990 reporting.
So I don't know the answer to that.
Yeah, I thought maybe perhaps that is outside your wheelhouse.
Are they asking, do you have, I don't think the 990 requires reporting of donor gifts, does it? There's the aggregate amount of how much you've raised from public support, but yeah, I don't know the answer to that question.
So this is David Reap. Hello.
Hi, David.
Coming up next. So this is in my wheelhouse, and just to answer very quickly, the minimum threshold for reporting on Schedule B for the 990 is $5,000 or more, depending on whether your organization is primarily funded through charitable donations or if it's funded through program service revenue. If it's primarily funded through charitable donations, that $5,000 threshold could be higher under certain circumstances, but $5,000 is kind of the minimum floor for Schedule B reporting on the 990.
Great, thank you.
And then there's also one other question that we want to sneak in, and if we have to go over a minute or two, I think that would be okay. And the question is, Carrie, do you have data on donor retention rates for donors initiating new gifts annually versus donors who have set up some sort of automated reoccurring donation?
Oh, I love that question. Oh, that's brilliant. So the data that I just shared is based on just an annual giving, right? Not recurring. I can go back and look. I'm guessing the Fundraising Effectiveness Project probably has that. But the reason why it's a brilliant question is it's something that we should be all thinking about. Have you created a recurring giving program at your organization? I'm assuming that those retention rates will be through the roof because it's just automatic. There's an organization that I give to monthly. I haven't thought about it since I set it up, right? And so my giving for them has happened for years. It's a monthly donation that I make, but it's a great question. I'll go back and see if the Fundraising Effectiveness Project has that, but I would assume it's through the roof because it takes intention to go back and stop that recurring gift. But all the other data that I shared were about those kind of annual gifts, year-over-year gifts. Any other questions?
I don't think I see any other questions. There are both people that asked the question expressed their thanks. So I guess they're taking your advice on giving thanks to another level.
That's right. Well, and I'll say thank you. So thanks to HW&Co for having me. Thanks to everybody for being in this session. Feel free to follow us on social media. We have a monthly e-newsletter if you want to sign up for that. So we're always sharing more information and any insights that we get that are industry insights we share. So thanks so much.
Okay, thank you for your time, Carrie. Lots of comments if you're not seeing them in the chat about great information.
Great. Wonderful.
So it's 10:50. Our next session is at 11 o'clock. And just as a reminder, when this closes, I'm attempting to put up the agenda. Here we are. You can choose one. So either it's going to be the financial, which is going to be the data analytics and financial analysis with Mike and Rachel, or with David and I, it's the state of nonprofit industry and the Giving USA report. When that pops up, keep in mind all the attendees are at the top of the box. And if you scroll down, you'll see financial and management. You click on one and you can choose the option to join. And just remember, if you end up in the wrong one, you can text the group. Oh, there is the box. So you can scroll down here. If these are the people that are already in there, but you would scroll down and choose your breakout room to join. So, I mean, everybody's in one, so it's not looking to how it's going to look, but you'll be able to see, you'll have management and you click over here and it'll tell you to join.
About 10 minutes. So just